It's Q1, and that means new goals, more growth, and upgrading your day-to-day workflow. While most sales folks are stuck in the mud of manual scheduling, digging into data, and tracking down leads, let me share a better way to win. The new HubSpot Sales Hub is filled with easy-to-use and powerful tools that make closing deals and collaborating across departments a breeze. Sales Hub is an all-in-one platform for converting contacts into customers, accelerating sales with smarter sequences, managing deals with simple and powerful tools, and forecasting targets and smarter sales insights. Plus, you can supercharge your work with AI-powered apps like ChatSpot. ChatSpot combines the power of ChatGPT and your HubSpot Smart CRM to give you a Gen AI-powered personal assistant. It's tailor-made to help you grow your business and deliver more revenue. Ask it to track down contacts, research competitors, summarize last week's sales, or draft on-message emails in seconds. Sales Hub is focused on helping you work smarter, not harder, so you can get after all those other New Year's goals. Close more deals and get on track for your best Q1 yet. Explore the new HubSpot Sales Hub and AI tools like ChatSpot at hubspot.com/sales.
I'm not much of a gadgets guy, but from what I can tell, wearables like smartwatches are a booming industry. The global smartwatch market is worth as much as $30 billion right now, and it might triple in value by the early 2030s. Here in the US, I know that parents want watches for their children so that way they can track and communicate with them when they're at school without having to buy them a smartphone. But Katherine, it seems like Apple hasn't been having a great last few months, even though they have like the most highly sought after smartwatch in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Tough time to be an Apple Watch. Just last week, Apple had to remove a feature allowing the watch to read people's blood oxygen levels or risk its watches being banned from the US.
I mean, that is like wild. How did this even happen?
It goes back to a longtime feud with a medtech company that Apple has been locked in a court battle with for the better part of the last 10 years. It's a pretty wild story, and we're going to break it down for you. I'm Katherine Laidlaw.
And I'm Mark Dent. And you're listening to the Hustle Daily Show, the weekend version. We are going to talk to you about Apple Watches and how they got banned. Until then, they weren't banned, but they were also kind of almost banned again until, as Katherine mentioned, there was this very recent decision by Apple to remove this highly coveted piece of technology from the watches that can tell somebody's blood oxygen levels. Now, this is the result of a saga that has stretched on for years between the tech giant and a company called Masimo. All right, Katherine, you described this battle between a medtech company and Apple as David versus Goliath. Except David is a billionaire and Goliath is a trillionaire. Who is this billionaire David?
So his name is Joe Kiani.
I bought a condo in 1987, like for $100,000. And I took a second on the condo. I got $40,000. And with that money, I started Masimo.
That's Joe Kiani. He didn't do an interview with us, but we have audio of him explaining the formation of his company, Masimo, from YouTube. Kiani started his company about 20 years ago from literally his garage in Silicon Valley, and he's become the market leader in something that's called pulse oximetry, which effectively means that you can measure the blood oxygen levels in your blood using light. It was a finding that revolutionized the industry, and Masimo is now responsible, directly or indirectly, for monitoring the health of 200 million patients across the US. Most of their clients have been hospitals or other institutions that have really relied on exact metrics to track their patients' health. But they have also recently expanded into the wearables market. And that takes us up to Kiani's beef with Apple, which began around 2013.
Right. And so to be clear, like Masimo has been just wildly successful. It's a billion-dollar company. They've been very successful at this. And with this new technology that they came up with, they didn't just bring it to market right away. There was a lot of research and they had to file a lot of patents. Can you take us through this whole patent process and why it's relevant to this battle with Apple right now?
Yes. So you've probably heard the word patent before. You know vaguely what a patent is, but the process for actually acquiring one is long and expensive and important, really important in some cases. The general rule of thumb that experts tend to use is that if you can keep your technology a secret, keep it a secret. Oftentimes, because when you release something to market, it's going to display how your technology works or what the design of your product is. You want to get that patented so you have an edge on your competitors. Anyone can file for one in the US as long as you have the time and money to do it. Patents themselves have been around since before the 1800s.
Yeah. And the big companies that we know, Google, Apple, Samsung, they all have like a delirious number of patents, right?
Hundreds of thousands of patents. Apple currently has more than 95,000 patents. Samsung has more than 350,000 patents. Global holds more than 100,000. The numbers are mind-boggling. And that's because anytime they consider making a change to a product, they'll file for patent supremacy or oversight for this particular change. So Apple has filed for thousands and thousands of patents over the years, some of which never get used, never get introduced. They filed for patents that will automatically change the color of the wristband of your Apple Watch, for example. That's not a feature that's been introduced. Maybe we'll see it in the future.
It sounds kind of cool.
It does sound cool. I was like, oh, you can match it to your shirt. It's like just kind of a novel instant accessorizing twist. I hope we see it. It hasn't appeared in the latest versions, but they patented for it, which indicates that it's something that they might be thinking about.
Right.
So patent filings are also kind of a cool way of looking at what's coming from your favorite companies or favorite tech. But patent applications themselves can actually cost companies up to $30,000 for research, filing, lawyers' fees. And so it's not to be taken lightly, for sure. It's not for the faint of heart.
And so Kiani, of course, he filed for patents for his pulsometry technology. This was in the early 90s. And immediately he starts having to get involved in litigation with it. There's another med tech company that had met with him to learn more about their innovations. Masimo, Kiani's company, it ultimately triumphed against them. Now let's fast forward about 20 years later. It's the early 2010s. It's 2013. And Apple comes calling. They want to visit with Kiani, which is kind of unusual because you don't think of pulse oximetry and Apple. So what happened?
Right. So Kiani was flattered by this request. He didn't think of Apple as competition at the time. They very firmly occupied the consumer space. He sold directly to healthcare facilities. So this is obviously a little bit different. And when one of the biggest companies in the world comes calling and is complimenting your work, of course, you're going to be here for that. I'd be here for that. Yeah. And so Kiani is thrilled. He takes the meeting. He travels to Cupertino. He meets with company execs, and they talk about potentially licensing his tech to use in the Apple Watch. That kind of licensing is common, especially in tech, so that you're not sort of building pre-existing technology from the ground up, company by company. You can sort of license use from other companies to incorporate that into your technology and sort of make these deals that make everybody happy.
Right. But they didn't do that. They didn't license his technology.
They did not do that. No. Plot twist. They, instead of licensing his technology, the following month, according to Massimo's claims, Apple hired away Massimo's chief medical officer.
Red flag.
A few months later, they hired another one of their scientists.
Another red flag.
And that scientist was actually one of the named inventors on the patents in question. Apple would go on after that to hire more than 20 Massimo employees, going so far as to open an office around the corner from Massimo's headquarters so those employees wouldn't have to move from Irvine, California. A little bit sketchy. I don't know about you. That's raising some red flags for me.
Yeah, just a few. So then let's fast forward a few years. After all these alleged hirings and I guess moving a whole office for some potential Massimo employees, Apple released the Series 6 watch. And there was something interesting about it, certainly according to Joe Kiani.
According to Joe Kiani, he recognized some of the technology in that Series 6 Apple Watch. The first with a blood oxygen level reader. And that is the technology that Massimo believes that it owns. It holds the patents to it. And it was also the first watch to be manufactured in China.
Okay.
Because it was manufactured in China, that gave Massimo an opening. They had an opportunity to file a challenge with the ITC. The ITC is set up to protect domestic industry. It guards against unfair competition, trade secret misappropriation, antitrust issues. It's also an easier avenue than going to court, mostly because it's faster.
Okay. And the reason why Massimo and Joe Chiani were able to take this avenue was because this version of the Apple Watch was manufactured in China and has to be imported to the US.
That's right. So it falls under the ITC's jurisdiction, where Massimo's manufacturing occurs actually in the States. And so it's considered under the purview of domestic industry that the ITC acts to protect.
Mm-hmm. And when was this?
So Chiani in 2021 did two things. He filed a challenge with the ITC, but also, interestingly enough, he launched his own wearable into the market.
The plot thickens.
Right. And so Massimo introduced its own wearable watch, which it argues has more and better health benefits than Apple's watch. It's largely marketed to similar clientele as its previous technology. So patients who really need to monitor their metrics really closely, caregivers who are trying to watch over what their patients are up to. But it is its first foray into sort of the broader consumer wearables market. So, of course, this caught Apple's attention, and it in turn responded both to the ITC challenge and by filing a design patent infringement lawsuit in Delaware. And so now you've got this fight playing out on a couple of different fronts.
Okay, so we have these kind of multiple court battles going on, one through the more traditional court system here in the US, another through this ITC that we just explained. And it started to become this really public, pretty big battle. Last fall in 2023, Joe Chiani testified about innovation and patents in front of the Senate.
When we're about to launch a product, we look to see if we might infringe someone's patents. And if we do, we don't launch the product. The big companies, I know one of them at least, doesn't do that. So that's why they get sued, because they just take people's IP.
Wow. And that's very dramatic.
So Joe Chiani is truly what I would describe as like a self-made inventor. He came to the US from Iran when he was very young, spoke virtually no English, finished high school early, finished university early, and developed this technology working with a couple of friends. Truly a sort of self-made entrepreneur in this space. And so I think that's part of where his intense passion for innovation and entrepreneurship comes from.
And so how have these legal battles gone for him? Who's kind of winning?
So because they're being fought on multiple fronts right now, it's a little bit hard to tell, though the experts that I've spoken to suggest that Massimo is winning in the short term and Apple will probably triumph in the long term.
All right, so what does that mean, though? What happened with the ITC?
So Massimo scored a huge victory when the ITC ruled in their favor. It actually issued an import ban on Apple watches. It ruled that Apple was infringing on Massimo's patents and issued a ban that meant that starting on December 26, 2023, Apple had to stop importing these particular watches. It's largely their more expensive Apple Watch line, Series 9 and Ultra 2. And so those watches, while still being available on store shelves right now, won't be for long.
Once the store's stock runs out, then Apple will no longer be able to import them in, and that's why they will no longer be on shelves.
That's exactly right. So stores can sell off their remaining stock, but there's no telling when that will sell out. And so if you're in the market for an Apple Watch, don't wait. Now would be the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned, though, also that Apple might be winning it. There was this other court case, of course. Why does Apple potentially have the upper hand long term?
So in addition to filing the ITC challenge, Massimo also filed a trade secret appropriation lawsuit against Apple. And that hinged upon this sort of targeted employee stealing that we had talked about before to get an edge on Massimo's tech. Decisions on these cases have slowly been trickling out, but they have largely gone in favor of Apple. And so in this past May, a deadlocked jury forced a mistrial in the trade secrets lawsuit. But the jury was deadlocked 6-1 in favor of Apple. And when that case goes to court again, experts suggest that it'll go in favor of Apple. And that'll invalidate part of Massimo's patents. And so how that trickles down or what effect that has on future ITC rulings is yet to be determined.
Wow. Okay. So that was a win for Apple. But in mid-January, they kind of waved the white flag. What happened since that December 26th import ban date and now?
So a game of legal ping pong. On December 27th, Apple filed an emergency request at the Court of Appeal. The Federal Circuit Court agreed to pause the ban in time for the ITC to write a response. The ITC fired back as predicted. They actually called Apple's arguments amounting to little more than an indisputably adjudicated infringer requesting permission to continue infringing the asserted patents.
That is salty.
That is some spicy rebuttal right there. And it worked. So 3 weeks after the Federal Circuit Court agreed to pause, the Court of Appeal reinstated the ban. So after that decision, Apple decided they would pull the tech that is in contention from their watches.
So no more oxygen sensors. Users cannot tell their blood oxygen level if they're buying a watch now, at least.
Yes, that's right. In the US, the original watches will still be available outside of the country. But as of the time of this recording, who knows what'll happen next week? You can't get one with those capabilities in the States.
In fact, I was looking, and what Apple has done for people who buy one now in the US and they want to check their blood oxygen levels, if they try to do that on the watch, then it takes them where they can click on a link and it takes them somewhere that explains this whole legal quagmire. And I'm sure that people are going to be in for a treat when they have to digest all that.
This is as much a publicity problem for Apple as a technological one. This is not a good look for them. You know, they've basically been found to have stolen this tech, used it in a wildly successful and beloved product, and now are sort of going back and either developing the software capabilities on their own, which they could have done in the first place, or going to sort of continue to pursue all of these different legal avenues. But not a good look for Goliath.
No, and I guess it's at least a slight win for David at this point, but mainly I think it's a big win for people who are able to buy this new version of the watch last fall because they do have the capabilities to still check their blood oxygen levels, or if you're buying it in Canada or something like that. So major victory for them. But that's going to do it for us today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today is Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer is Darren Clarke. We've got a lot more tech and business coverage for you in our newsletter. So if you're not subscribed, please go get signed up at thehustle.co/email, and we will catch you tomorrow.
All right, everybody. I've been listening to this podcast lately. It's fantastic. It's called DTC Pod, hosted by Ramon Barrios and Blaine Bolus. It's brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, which is the audio destination for business professionals. DTC Pod is a podcast about all things direct to consumer, as it says in the title. Ramon and Blaine cover everything from starting, growing, and optimizing e-commerce stores and DTC or D2C brands. They have a lot of great conversations with founders, marketers, platforms, creators, and marketing and growth agencies to cover all these topics like brand building, social media, influencer marketing, website conversion, paid media, Facebook ads, consumer trends, email marketing, and much, much more, if you could even believe it. If you're interested in stories behind your favorite consumer brands, this podcast is tailor-made for you. Just the other day, I was listening to an episode and their guest was Mikey Taylor. Mikey started as a professional skateboarder and flipped his life into becoming a huge entrepreneur dealing in real estate, owning his own brewing company, and also owning a skateboard company called Sovereign Skateboards. This guy really flipped his life into something insane, and it's so cool to listen to how he did it every single step of the way. Definitely go check that episode out. It's really, really inspiring. And you can listen to DTC Pod wherever you get your podcasts.